Welcome to the Future Focus, a look beyond with Peter and Peter, Peter Coffey and Peter Mulford. This is part two, by the way. Hopefully you got to catch part one. I am Mike Anastasides, Solutions Director with Hike2. Hike2, we provide advisory services and solutions for companies across industries such as public sector institutions and professional services companies, high-tech companies, law firms. We are a consulting firm with a focus in several different areas. Cloud solutions, certainly Salesforce, Snowflake, other similar cloud solutions, data and analytics, innovation, human-centered design, advisory services. We help firms, we help organizations that are looking to digitally transform, really make the most of what they have today from a current technical investment perspective and from a future technical investment perspective. Of course, we're doing this to help our clients solve some of their biggest business challenges. And I am thrilled to be joined by our two guests, Peter and Peter. I'll start with Peter Mulford quickly. Peter Mulford, global partner and chief innovation officer at BTS. He leads the innovation and digital transformation practice at BTS, a management consultancy focused on strategy execution. He helps leaders and teams from Fortune 500 companies from around the world succeed with digital transformation. Last time we chatted, I don't know if he remembers this, I'm sure he does, Peter had been facilitating an offsite meeting at the Vatican with Pope Francis. Peter, have you had any interactions recently with the Pope? That's my first question to you.
Yes, no, I haven't, not since then. But thanks for asking.
We can leave that maybe towards the end. Maybe I don't know. Maybe something will come in, and then maybe he'll email you in the next hour. Peter's based in New York City. Peter Coffey, VP of Strategic Research at Salesforce. Peter holds an engineering degree from MIT and an MBA from Pepperdine. He's been a faculty member at Pepperdine, at UCLA. He's lectured at Stanford, at Caltech, at Harvard Business School, Sloan School of Management at MIT. He's been at Salesforce for 18 years, and
yes,
I was at Salesforce for quite a while. He's without question not only one of the top thought leaders at Salesforce, but a top thought leader in the tech industry. Peter ordinarily is based in Bellevue, Washington. Today, he is in the fantastic city of Chicago. I'm going to pass this in a minute over to Peter Mulford. He's going to be interviewing Peter Coffey during today's session. But before I do that, some logistical items for the team, for those of you listening and watching. If you do have questions, please use the Q&A functionality in Zoom. We'll keep a close eye on that and be surfacing those questions as they come up. And this webinar is meant to be an introduction to the Hike2 Innovation Summit, a journey into what innovation could look like for your companies and for your firms. Innovation Summit is going to be in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. August Wilson African American Culture Center in Pittsburgh, March 26 and 27. So if you're in the Pittsburgh area, we'd love to see you. If you have colleagues or friends in Pittsburgh, spread the word. We'd love to see you. We'd love to see them there. With that, enough with the commercial. Let's get over to Peter Mulford to get this started. Peter, take it away.
Thanks a lot, Mike. And by the way, in your introduction, you did do a faithful rendering of what BTS does, but you forgot to mention we are also a happy Hike2 customer. You do great work for us, so I want to throw that in for you as well. Thank you for all you do.
Thank you.
And welcome. So the other Peter Coffey, hello again.
Good to be with you, Peter.
Yeah, it's wow. As Larry McMurtry put it, life sure does meander like a stream. I think the last time you and I spoke, we covered a lot of ground. We got into cybersecurity, we talked about quantum computing, and of course we talked about AI. And I think AI is probably where I'd like to begin, because that's the one where it's not the only place where there's change, but good heavens, the amount of change is
yes.
quite astonishing.
Yes.
So maybe we could start by building a bridge between our last conversation and now. When last we spoke, you were very optimistic about the potential for AI to reimagine work and to make a better future for all of us. So perhaps we could start by having you catch us up on what's going on in your head. What are your thoughts about the current state of AI. And is there anything that's happened since the last time we spoke that has particularly surprised you as a futurist?
Well, not so much surprised as that there's an expression that many people can tell you what the world will look like, and they're called futurists, but those who can tell you when it will look like that are called billionaires. It is very much about the timing. In April of 2023, so going on 2 years ago, I wrote something internally about why people should not focus too heavily on conversational generative AI as being, the new path that AI would henceforth follow, and suggested that in the same way that VisiCalc on PCs completely changed people's relationship with quantitative modeling compared to what it had been when it was COBOL on a mainframe. COBOL on a mainframe, when computing was capital intensive, skills intensive, you could only have one. There was actually a photo essay in the Life Science Library book of The Engineer that said, today the computer is becoming almost as important to the engineer as his slide rule, and every major school of engineering has one. You had a computer, and it did general purpose things. And then there was this metastasization where all of a sudden everyone could have interactive, bespoke, iteratively refined quantitative modeling on a machine that pretty much anyone who had a question worth answering could afford to buy. And I suggested in 2023 that we should expect to see that trajectory followed by generative AI as well. And I think many people would agree that the advent of DeepSeek only a few weeks ago now might have been that punctuation moment when suddenly, wait a minute, it's not going to be a massive, highly centralized, extremely general purpose capability that transforms the way we relate to machine intelligence. It's going to be everyone being able to have the one they need curated on the data they trust that is relevant to their problem, and have it be something that learns with them and adapts to them and serves them personally. And interestingly, this, I think, is very much the architecture that Apple is proposing with what they call Apple Intelligence, where to the greatest possible degree, the intelligence and the data live at the edge. You don't overwhelm and saturate a shared network or require literally nuclear power plants to be built to power the training of large general purpose models. Rather, you push the power as close as possible to the point of use. You maintain possession, control, and trust in the data as close as possible to the party with skin in the game. And we have already seen that trajectory is, I think, well underway. And I think that's an observation that I could have said was inevitably going to take place months ago. But that now I think people would say, okay, the reality check event has happened. I now believe that curve is hockey sticking. And that would be the biggest change. Not so much a surprise, but now I can put a time on it, and the time is now behind me instead of an estimate of in front of me.
So are you saying you're a billionaire, Peter?
No, I am not, because I did not in fact predict that timing. Had I sold NVIDIA short on one particular day a few weeks ago and then been prepared to harvest over a matter of a few days, I could have profited handsomely, but I did not.
Got it.
Now, you asked if there was anything else, and the other thing that I think would be a really important transition that's taking place. Eric Brynjolfsson at MIT talked about the Turing trap, Turing, as in Turing test, where the early notion that it will be intelligent if you can have a conversation with it and not be sure that it's not a human being, that will be the proof that it is now what we call intelligent. Right. Eric Brynjolfsson pointed out that the result of that, in effect, definition of intelligence was to channel decades of AI research toward that goal of being able to carry on a conversation. And Eric's ironic observation is, yeah, but we have things that can carry on a conversation. They're called human beings. What human beings do quite poorly is entertain multiple differing hypotheses simultaneously. Even in a room full of people, the first good idea that's offered anchors the conversation, and it's difficult to break the conversation away from refining the first good idea into, well, what about some genuinely different approaches? The idea that your AI could be better than a human at entertaining several ideas simultaneously. Marvin Minsky used the phrase society of mind to suggest that what you really want is an AI that isn't like a human, but is like a room full of humans who are not intimidated by each other and can maintain original lines of thinking that synergize each other. And building systems that can do that is something that I hope we will try hard to do. It is not the path of least resistance. When ChatGPT threw a conversational interface on an LLM, it effectively choked down the possibility of multiple hypotheses into something that now has a single thread of conversation with a human user. And the metaphor that I'm using is that if you've ever been at the beach and seen a plane fly by towing an advertising banner, well, you could have a 747 towing a much, much larger banner, or you could have a drone show where there are many, many small entities that are able to cooperate, collaborate. Today, a drone show doesn't just merely move from static image to static image. We had a drone show at Seattle on New Year's Eve in which the drones were delivering animated displays like an airplane flying around a rotating globe. And I did a little bit of investigating on how do you do that? And the authoring software for these things now is very abstract. This is the animation I want to achieve. And the back end works out all the flight paths of all the drones so that they don't collide with each other. They've achieved that level of abstraction where I can now visualize the outcome and have the innards coordinated for me in this physical world. We'll try to imagine AIs that work more like a drone show and less like a 747 towing the biggest advertising banner you've ever seen. And you'll see where I hope we can go. It's certainly what we're at Salesforce trying to do with our Agentforce offering, is to build the infrastructure in which orchestration of multiple agents will be a natural path instead of just one bigger and bigger, smarter and smarter, Oz the Great and Powerful behind the curtain.
Well, okay. So as always, Peter, there's a lot in there. That was a cognitive fruit smoothie that was very dense with nutrients. Let me see if I can take a step back and unpack
Please
that.
do.
We can wander over that terrain step by step. But I heard you talk about a shift from AI moving from data centers to edge devices.
Yes.
You talked about what I think it was Mustafa Suleyman at Microsoft referred to as the shift from, AI as a chatbot to polymathic thinking.
Yes, I would not disagree with that characterization. No, yeah.
Yeah, and then you referred a little bit to agentic AI, which I know.
Yes, I did.
And I know that's something that Salesforce, where you work, is really leading the charge on that.
Thank you for assessing it that way. I appreciate that.
Yeah. And then, of course, related to all this is the, comparing where we were in 23 when you saw some of these shifts.
Yes.
To where we are now. Nothing surprising, but nonetheless enlightening. And it sounds like buried beneath all of your comments, you see there's some really interesting potential for reimagining how work might get done, particularly if we can move away from you were talking about the Turing test, thinking about systems to more of this polymathic thinking. So let's
and another key development, because there should always be three, would be that the prospect of attempting to regulate this is no longer prospective. I think that it is, since the last time we spoke, that what people refer to as the European Union's AI Act has now been put on paper, and in theory, some of its dates, its critical dates, have now arrived. And I have two cavils with that. One, calling it an AI Act, I think, overstates its power to control, because if you read the document, it is really 400 and some pages of guidelines. As Captain Barbosa says in Pirates of the Caribbean, it's not so much a code as a set of guidelines. And it is a directive, if you will, to the member states to have their legislatures write actual laws. And if you do a simple text search of the AI Act for the phrase member states should do something, as opposed to must, you'll discover that there's tremendous opportunity for variations in implementation of that act. And the idea that now there's going to be one set of rules is vastly overstated. And also the implementation dates of some of the most important provisions of that framework are years ahead. So the idea that it's going to be regulated is no longer a hypothetical, but the idea that it's already being regulated is, I think, overstated.
Well, I think we'll get into that. And of course, you know that right now, as we're recording this, a group of internet politicians and business leaders are meeting in Paris this week to talk about this exact topic at the AI summit there. So let's rewind the tape and let's start at the very beginning. So I think you would probably agree, or you've noticed that many of your peers in and around the industry have described AI as variously as the steam engine of the fourth industrial revolution. I think that was the expression that was being thrown around Davos during the World Economic Forum.
Yes.
And that kind of language definitely makes headlines, for sure. But if you look past all of the hype and the noise and really plant your feet in the ground, how transformative is AI? I mean, really, compared to some of the past technology shifts that you were referring to at the start of the call. And related to that, for the non-technical leader trying to get her head around this, what is it that actually makes it unique relative to some of these other transitions?
Sure. Well, the phrase fourth industrial revolution was certainly heavily bruited about following a World Economic Forum event. And yes, the steam engine was often invoked as a metaphor. But at the time, I took a pretty strong position that mistaking the artifact for the revolution was a mistake to avoid. That the steam engine made power scalable. Previously, it was the case that if you needed a horsepower, you needed a horse. And if you wanted 20 horsepower, you had needed 20 horses. Well, Robert Fulton's steamboat was a 20 horsepower motor, but what made it the breakthrough that it was that motor was not so massive that it used all the payload capacity of the boat, and that the technology to build a steam engine that small and import it to the US from Boulton and Watt in the UK was treated probably about the same way today that getting an NVIDIA chip in Beijing would be. It was treated as a strategic technology. And the massive centralized steam engine could not be distributed to a small artisanal workshop. You had to build a massive factory to use all that power. So what happens? Manchester, England doubles its population twice in a decade, and there's a massive migration of farmers to cities to become factory workers. The migration of the people was the revolution. The steam engine may have catalyzed the revolution, but it was the transformation of an agrarian workforce to an industrialized factory workforce and a capitalistic model that was the true revolution. And so from there, the transition from steam to electrical power becomes interesting because now you can build small electrical motors and not just, it's hard to build a pocket-sized steam engine, but you can build miniature electric motors. You can have hand tools. You can have workshops and power tools. And so we added, from scale of energy capacity, we added distribution of that capacity. And notice the revolutions are cumulative, not successive. We had power, then we had distribution of the power. Then we had a third revolution where we added information to the watts and to the volts and amperes and the crude watts of energy. Now we added communication and control to that network. And that was arguably a third revolution. And then, of course, we had digital computers to perform calculations on that. I was at the Exxon Baton Rouge chemical plant at the time when we put in the first digital control room. And we literally went from an environment where at the beginning of the day, you would go to a wall-sized cabinet, open it up, and there would be the pen and ink chart from the chart recorder over the night. And you would look at it to see if anything bad had happened. And if nothing terrible had happened, you would file it away. And we put in the first digital control room, and now it was possible to do quantitative analysis and get pre-failure warnings of things. And it turned into information and not just a record of power consumed. And that was the third. So what is the fourth revolution? It is the addition of machine power to optimization and planning, so that now we don't merely have systems of record, but now we have systems of recognition, forecasting, and prediction that can actually do, useful foresight, and again, optimization rather than merely recording of what we have done. It can give us guidance onto what we should do. And that is arguably what the fourth revolution really is. From scalability of power to distribution of that power to communication and control that add value to that power. And now in a time dimension, making prediction and optimization of what we do with that information become available pretty much to anyone.
So if I follow your analogy, right, so you were making the point that, hey, if we go back to the first industrial revolution, the steam engine was the catalyst, but
Yes.
what you notice is the transformation really had more to do with a migration of labor and what that labor did and its transformative effects on society around it.
Yes.
In this shift, you're making the point that we have a shift towards, prediction and accelerated computation by any other name.
Yes.
So if that's analogous to the steam engine, what is the actual transformation you see happening or that you can imagine
Yes.
might soon happen?
Well, it is already happening. The good news is it is already happening, as William Gibson is accurately quoted as having said, the future is already here, just very unevenly distributed. And you can find pieces of this future already taking place. I commented on how you had that agrarian workforce all move to the cities to become factory workers. Well, at the same time, their children who had previously, as soon as they were old enough to hold a tool and stay out of the way of the sharp instruments, were working side by side with their parents and becoming collaborative problem solvers. But then once mom and dad are going to the factories, the kids have to go to classrooms, and you have a factory model of learning, which is still with us. The children still show up on time, sit where they're told, follow instructions, and go home when the bell rings. So the paradox is that even as employers are saying, I don't need that kind of worker, I need a collaborative problem solver, but we have a massive inertia in the way we educate young people to produce effectively the future factory worker in a world that isn't really going to be wanting that. But what you can already see is that there are elementary school teachers who say, how can I ever teach a child to write when a generative AI can write the essay for them? I have seen essays by former college professors who have recently left the field because they have despaired of the possibility of ever getting a student to do the work required to deliver an A or A minus grade of written work when they can get a B plus in 10 minutes from a Gen AI. But the elementary school teachers who are seeing the lemonade instead of the lemon are saying, wait a minute, now instead of laboriously learning to craft a paragraph, I can have an elementary school student be shown, this is a prompt that was given to an AI. This is the paragraph that it wrote. Criticize. And you can begin the process of becoming a critical evaluator and not merely a laborious, minimal composer of content so much earlier now. And we can raise a generation of critical thinkers who can all have, in effect, a personal tutor at their elbow and in their ear, helping them become better at what they do and helping them learn to be improvers of work instead of merely having to struggle to learn to do that work.
Okay, so let me double click on that for a second. So what I heard you say there, and again, as always, if I put words in your mouth that don't belong there, just pull it out and say,
I'll let you know. I'll let you know.
But you shined a light on perhaps one of the first areas where AI could be transformative, and that's in education. And
Yes.
one of the things you noticed is that for some educators, not everywhere, but for some, they're seeing that there's an opportunity to look at AI not as something that's a shortcut to garbage, but actually can be a tool to stimulate
Yes.
critical thinking.
Yes.
And you probably saw the news in your home state. Actually, no, do you live in Washington State, Peter?
I'm in the state of Washington, yes.
That's funny, for some reason, just because of your big brain, I just assumed Silicon Valley, but you've probably heard in California, the CSU, California State University system, just gave ChatGPT to 430,000 students. And I think it's 52,000 faculty. So now everybody gets it. And this is, of course, the largest organizational deployment of ChatGPT in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Yet, and of course, what must be sitting downstream of that is both students and faculty that are of the same mind as you, who are realizing, this isn't something to be
One hopes.
make or
One
dumber.
hopes. Yeah.
One hopes. So what I heard you say there is two things. You talked about one way in which it's transforming how something gets done, and in this case, education.
Yes.
And I also heard you say what goes along for the ride is a mindset shift. The two have to go together. In order for, in this case, education to be transformed, you have to think about it differently. So if we hold those twin gargoyles in the air for a second,
okay,
and step out of education and perhaps look at the business world where many of our listeners.
Yes.
There's again a lot of buzz about the potential for agentic AI to, variously I've heard hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars in annual productivity. Of course, Salesforce is one of the companies that's shouting in that direction.
We hope to be helpful in that area. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, but the other thing about you, Peter, is you've always had your feet firmly planted in the ground, even though you've been an optimist. So from where you are standing, obviously AI isn't going to transform everything overnight, but where do you see the most significant economic opportunities to turn those two dials in, say, the next 3 to 5 years? I mean, 5 to 10. Sure. It'll probably be everywhere, but if I'm a business leader and I'm thinking where I should be paying attention, where do you see it in the next 3 to 5?
I try to avoid making predictions by cheating and looking at things that are already baked in and just a matter of this is definitely going to happen. I sometimes say
this right and you become a billionaire. I want you to hire me as your
Well, I point out that the light that left Proxima Centauri 4 1/3 years ago is going to hit Earth today, and I don't call that a prediction. I think that's really going to happen. I'm pretty damn confident that's going to happen. And in the same way, demographic change is not a prediction. If I know how many 60-year-olds there are today, I've got a pretty good handle on how many 80-year-olds there will be 20 years from now. It's not really a prediction. And by the year 2035, 2050, you're going to start to see a population in which the number of people over 50 and the number of people under 5 are approximately equal for the first time in human history. All of our institutions of education, hiring, training and development, how we promote people, how we retain people in organizations, and crucially, how we care for their health are going to be transformed by this certainty that we will be dealing with a population of over 50s, over 60s, over 70s like we've never seen before. These will be the wealthiest, best educated, most demanding, and least technophobic older people you've ever seen. Today's 60-year-old, let us remember, was in their 20s when this new thing called a Macintosh came along, and they were explaining to people this radical new idea of, window, icon, menu, pointer. Well, they didn't get less tech savvy as they got older. And a friend of mine said, well, Peter, it's not that the older are getting tech savvy, it's that the tech savvy are getting old. And so all of the things we think we know about things like online banking, online virtual healthcare, these are going to become readily taken up by the largest and most demanding customer base you've ever seen. So if you're in healthcare, if you're in education, if you're in human resources, if you're in financial services, that demographic certainty of a tech-friendly, affluent, educated, ready to take advantage of your services customer is something on which you can place very big and very low-risk bets. Health and life sciences in particular, because the current healthcare system simply cannot scale to deal with the size of the population that is not going to be dying in their 60s because they won't have been smoking. They will be in better physical shape. They're going to be lasting longer. So instead of dying in a matter of months following their first heart attack, they will be with us for years of needing lifestyle monitoring management. What that means is that the role of AI in healthcare is crucial. I was with someone from Pfizer just yesterday who pointed out that 25% of medical professionals' time today is spent on paperwork. And if we can have AI meaningfully accelerate the process of preparing and completing reports, transcribing notes, taking the vast quantities of unstructured data that are currently, the atherosclerotic plaques of the healthcare system, and streamlining that, well, doing that math, that would be roughly a 1/3 increase in the amount of medical care that a given medical professional can provide, simply by giving them the advantage of those power tools to do the things that are not high value but are necessary parts of the healthcare process.
Okay, so let me pause and linger on that point for a second. So what I think I'm hearing you say there is kind of interesting. You're pointing out that, rather than focus on the path technology is taking, one place to look to see where technology will be interesting in the future is demographic
Yes.
change. And you're
Well,
noticing
all of the important changes will not be technologies looking for something to do. They will be demographic or climate related, environmental necessities, creating a need for a kind of capability that is not scalable with current technology, that does not have the talent pool that it needs to do it with humans alone. There was a comment in the chat stream about the role of the payers, the health insurance providers and so on in all of this. And I've had some very productive conversations with them where I've pointed out that they're currently perceived as almost barriers to healthcare delivery. And there's been some considerable controversy about that perception of late. They have an opportunity to change completely their role in the system, because medical care is about pills and procedures and office visits. That's what it does. But a payer can do things like establish an affiliate relationship with the frequent purchaser program of a major grocery chain and start to give you healthcare cost incentives and discounts if your purchases of food indicate choices that are, healthier choices. Or I can take the data from wearable devices, Fitbits and Apple Watches and others, and make that inform the personalized assessment of risk. And in fact, John Hancock Insurance at one point a few years ago said, from now on, all of the things that we offer in the area of life insurance will have some opportunity to be informed by this quantitative data we can get on, are people adopting and practicing low risk and risk reducing and health improving behaviors, because that affects the assessment of their risk. So this is the demographic need or the environmental necessity, combined with the availability of people to do it or not, the scalability of the current process or not, will tell you where the AI will be pulled in and made to work, as opposed to what will come out of a laboratory looking for a place where it can be offered to work.
So what I like about what you're saying there is as always, you're encouraging us to take, the long view, right, and get out and look at the world of opportunities from the future back.
Yes.
What I wonder about, though, is at the same time as you're encouraging us to take the long view, in the present moment, you've probably noticed it's simply the case that consultants and vendors and academics alike seem to be really fond of ringing an alarm bell and saying, AI is impacting every industry right now, and that complacency is dangerous right now. Now, I'm sure you would agree that the reality is a little bit more nuanced. So in your opinion, if you dial back to the present moment, and you from where you sit, you look across industries and tasks, where do you see the most rapid change happening right now? And what would you say are the specific use cases that are driving that change?
Well, the long view of what's going to be needed when you bring it back to the present moment can sometimes create a substantial urgency of doing something right now, because if you're going to need something, and if you're going to have a critical need 6 years from now, and it's going to take 5 years of work to have that implemented, then you have 1 year to get that started. Or if it's going to take 4 years, you should have started it 2 years ago. And the connectivity of data, the management and governance of that data, who owns what privacy protections will be applied, what techniques can be used. For example, what Apple has talked about, I don't think they coined the phrase, but the phrase differential privacy.
Okay.
And there's another one called homeomorphic encryption, where I can protect certain aspects of data that should not be widely distributed, personalized aspects, while still preserving epidemiological value or still preserving climatological value of that data. Do I want people to know where I personally have been driving every minute of the day? No. Would I be okay with the data on the movement of my vehicle being aggregated with the movement of other vehicles to optimize traffic flow in a city and reduce the amount of pollution pumped out by cars sitting in bumper-to-bumper traffic? Yes. And so there are techniques that can be used given massive connectivity, given massive computational power, and given regulatory frameworks that prevent a race to the bottom of doing it in a sloppy way because it's cheaper. If we can raise the floor on how strict the regulation and control needs to be, so that the worst case becomes acceptable, then everybody can enjoy the benefits of having that available at a lower cost. You don't want to race to the bottom. That's the path that we need to work actively to prevent.
That's interesting. So what I think I heard.
Hey, I'm sorry, Peter and Peter. I'm sorry. I just wanted to quickly jump in, and I know. Yeah, there's a question out on the Q&A, and I want to continue to
Please.
encourage.
Yes,
questions.
absolutely.
Yeah.
The more interaction we get, the better. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is from Robert Barker for Peter Coffey. You hinted at companies and AI evolving and growing together. Is there a risk of human AI groupthink, Peter Coffey?
If what that means is reduced diversity of thought, the phenomenon of generative AI increasingly finding that the easiest data to get is the output of other generative AI, which is either the cost-reducing technique, so-called distillation for producing models at lower cost, or just the inevitable result that if you have it reading everything on the internet, an increasing fraction of that is machine-generated. That's already been shown quickly to reduce the quality of the output that you get. I hesitate to use the word creativity. It sounds too anthropomorphic, but the degree to which you can be impressed by the possibility that the AI will produce a useful surprise quickly shrinks if the AI is consuming each other. If that's what he means by human AI groupthink, I completely agree. And among the reasons why it's so important to have our educational system educating critical thinkers, collaborators, and problem solvers instead of merely mastering subject matter knowledge is precisely that we need to keep that human, for lack of a better word, that human element in the system so that it is continually stirred, so that there is continuing fresh oxygen being stirred into the pool before it becomes stagnant. I think Robert had another follow-up question.
Yeah, and I just want to chime in on that as well. What I would say to that is, just echoing Peter Coffey's point, by keeping a human in the loop, that also means that depending on how you interact with AI, it is actually possible by dint of your interactions to keep groupthink from happening. And the easiest way to think about it is, are you using AI as, say, Google on steroids, where you're just asking for an answer to something and then accepting what you get?
Yes.
Or, Peter, you said you inferred you were loath to anthropomorphize it. I would push back on that, say you do want to anthropomorphize it, because if you start to think about it as a very well-read, but very naive coworker, it changes your dynamic with it. And
I've used that metaphor of, imagine that you have an intern who does nothing but read stuff, but actually knows nothing about the business. They may make suggestions that 9 times out of 10 are, okay, cool idea, but you didn't know this. Okay, fine. Now it knows this. So there is an opportunity for interaction there. And Robert talked about, talking about companies developing their own AI instances and using their own data. It is tremendously important that the curation of data not become a moat outside of which you don't pay any attention to what's happening. People talk about the Moore's law rate of improvement on transistor density and use that as a proxy for the improvement of computing price performance. But at one point I drew the curves based on the cost of something as simple as, the modem that used to be a separate box next to your PC and then became something that every PC had built in. The rate of cost per unit performance of connection improvement has been vastly greater. The ability of your computer to connect to and ingest data from all kinds of sources has grown more quickly than its ability to do computation on that data. And this is not generally noticed because people think, wow, the machines are so much faster. Yeah, well, it's kind of a paradox that people say, if my machine is so much faster, why am I not really feeling like I'm getting a faster computing experience? And the fact is, the quantity of stuff that you're asking your machine to digest and find value in it has grown faster than the computational power of the machine. It used to be you would ask it to read a document. Now you ask it to watch a video and tell you what happened. That's a much more intensive task. And it's been particularly interesting to see just over the last few years how the architecture of the processing power of a laptop computer has changed to meet that change of workload. If you look at what an Apple M4 chip is designed to do compared to what, say, an Intel 486 chip was designed to do, you can see that the processing power is not merely growing. It is reshaping itself around the kind of workload that we expect AI to do. I resist the idea of calling the result an AI chip, but it is a better front end to an AI system in that it is optimized for ingesting and extracting information from the kind of data flows that are now so increasingly abundant.
Yeah, I think just to put a fine point on that, Peter,
Please.
If you want to get an experience that'll really illustrate what Peter's talking about, just sign up for ChatGPT Pro and ask it to do some deep research for you on something called the O1 reasoning model. And what you'll notice immediately, you'll actually have an opportunity to see the AI going from step to step to step to step.
Yes,
and it takes a while. It takes a while. And by a while, I mean, we've grown so accustomed to just typing in a prompt and getting a response that, oh, wow, it'll take you maybe a half hour, but a half hour to do a week's worth of work.
Yes.
And the thought, I don't know, Peter, about you, but the thought that we might actually get to a point where a reasoning model could move as quickly tomorrow as, say, a Google search would work today is that's kind of a mind-blowing thought.
That's not a controversial, projection of the continued growth. People who say, oh, Moore's law is leveling off have consistently been proved wrong. Every time an S-curve begins to plateau, the next S-curve takes over. And this is something that Bill Joy observed years ago, is that the aggregate of one S-curve following another S-curve following another S-curve can be a hockey stick that goes on for quite some time. But there are at least 3 points now that you've unlocked that I want to be sure we explore. One of them is the work being done by Tom Malone at the Center for Collective Intelligence at MIT, which asks simple questions like, what's the IQ of a group? It is not the average of their IQs. It is not the IQ of the smartest person in the room. Two high IQ people with radical differences in viewpoint might actually have a lower intelligence in any useful way than either of them would alone. And when I had a conversation with him once, I asked, have we screwed ourselves by going from an email model where I see a question and I get a chance to think about what I think about it before I see anyone else's opinions, to more and more instantaneous chat or video conferencing, where now we're back to the old behavior of the first person to blurt out something halfway interesting anchors the conversation. And Tom looked at me and said, we don't know yet, but yeah, we need to explore that. So you may need to think about optimizing your manner of collaboration to preserve actual independence before aggregation. And these are words I'm picking from a National Academy of Sciences paper that talked about this so-called wisdom of crowds effect. It turns out that if aggregation comes too soon, you don't get a wise crowd, you get a dumb herd. And so that's one of the aspects, is that we need to craft environments in which human creativity is not, in effect, suppressed by the technology getting so good that we no longer get the chance to do independent thinking. We do get groupthink. So that's one of the issues. Another thing I want to make sure we spend some time on, because it scored quite high in a survey of attendees' interests, is what's the impact of a quantum computing model on all of this. The hardware is still, if it is on the transitional zone from science project to prototype of a real machine, but already people thinking about how would they do computation on a quantum machine, where, for those not familiar with more than just the phrase, imagine that 2 bits can be either 00, 01, 10, or 11, but they can only represent one of those 4 states. If they're quantum bits, or so-called qubits, then those 2 bits can, in effect, simultaneously represent all 4 states. And you can conduct computations that are now not feasible in terms of time or hardware in ways that now can literally do in minutes what would otherwise take hours or even centuries to do with more classical devices. This is already being applied to tasks from financial risk assessment to grocery shelf restocking. Merely by thinking, how would I do this on quantum hardware? New algorithms are emerging that had not come to people's minds when they were thinking about a single-threaded, von Neumann machine architecture like we've had. And this is such a fascinating result of merely thinking about, how would I do this if I had quantum hardware? People are writing software that already achieves significant performance breakthroughs, even on the hardware that we have today. And I love to see that kind of unexpected synergy and catalysis taking place. It's so much fun to see that happen.
Okay, so you just managed to open a door to a completely different universe there that I think we should step through on quantum computing. But perhaps
Sure.
Before we do that, one last thing you said a moment ago that I want to click on is you talked a little bit about AI regulation at the very start of this.
Yes.
You referring what was going on in
It's an important question.
in Europe. So maybe we could, before we step through the door of into quantum computing,
Sure.
We could linger for a moment talking about ethical AI development and deployment. And there seems to be a really interesting debate that, if I were to parse it into 2, there's this argument that use cases should be regulated, not the technology, and vice versa. So I wonder, I'm sure you're familiar with the debate. Do you agree with that? And if not, what is your point of view on the right way to do that? And what would you regulate, or would you recommend we regulate?
The history of attempting to regulate technology in general, and information technologies in particular, is rife with examples of, this seemed like a good idea given the technology we had at the time, but the regulation became a perverse block to doing things better. For example, early attempts by the EU to regulate information governance resulted in administrators of machines being prohibited by law from doing perfectly ordinary administrative tasks. Because if you've got a well-intentioned law that says you may not manipulate a person's owned and created information without their permission, well, what happens when an employee leaves a company and you want to remove their account from the corporate system? Literally, you are destroying information created by another person without seeking or obtaining that person's permission. Literally, you are breaking the law. And the degree to which legislators fail to think in sufficiently general terms before they write proscriptive rules is a long observed pattern, and that can easily happen with this. Which is why, if someone says you should regulate the use, not regulate the tech, I think that's where that comes from, and I think there's a lot of validity to that. The other observation is something that was said by someone at our Federal Trade Commission at a meeting I was at once, when he said, just because you're doing it on a computer doesn't mean you need a new body of law to control it. Fraud is fraud. You don't need a new body of law against cyber fraud. What you need to do is work backwards and identify the areas in which your current laws make unconscious assumptions based on the technology that you're using now, and peel those away so that the law can do its real job of controlling that behavior. And I'll give you one of my favorite examples, a case in which a British court was being asked to adjudicate a claim of forgery. And the dialogue between the judge and the attorney is wonderful, because the judge says, my learned esquire, the statute of forgery requires that an instrument be used to obtain access to an asset. Is the Crown prepared to introduce into evidence the instrument? Because this would normally be a document with a signature that had been provably not the real signature, and so on. And the lawyer says, well, my lord, the instrument was a pattern of bits in a computer. It no longer exists. And the judge nods and says, okay. And the asset to which access was given? Well, my lord, the act of forgery was used to obtain access to information on trading in progress, and that asset no longer exists either. And the judge said, gentlemen, what the defendant did was undoubtedly a bad thing, but Parliament has yet to write a law that makes it a crime. And that's such an interesting question, is if you look at your laws, do they make unconscious assumptions, unexpressed assumptions about the manner in which a bad thing will be done, and then regulate that behavior instead of sufficiently defining the harm that would be done and making the harm the crime instead of the action, which is now an anachronistic, obsolete idea, the crime. Yeah. It would be as if a law against murder assumed it could only be done with a knife and didn't know anything about firearms. It would be almost like that. So that's one of the questions about AI regulation is, are you clearly defining the harm you seek to prevent and criminalizing that harm, or are you taking a shortcut and criminalizing the use of a particular technology in a particular way, in a way that becomes obsolete and irrelevant?
Interesting. So stay
tuned. Quick time check, guys. We got about 7 minutes left.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mike. So let's jump to quantum computing for the minutes that are left. Now, just a few moments ago, you were talking about qubits.
Yes.
And qubit stability and inferring error correction and the rest.
Yes.
But for anyone that you lost, I could imagine
I might have lost a few people there.
Yeah. In the conversation.
Yeah.
If we bring the conversation down to earth, just
happy to do that.
Simply put, what do you see at this moment in time as the most promising near-term applications of quantum computing that a non-technical person ought to be thinking about, even if she or he is kind of lost in or is not really up to speed with what
the most urgent understanding of quantum computing is this. People often make statements like, well, computers can only think in ones and zeros. They say, well, computers aren't like people. They can't see the shades of gray in anything. They can only see, black and white. And if you go back literally to 1948, when Norbert Wiener wrote Cybernetics, he actually shows why, with the hardware available at the time, ones and zeros were the only cost-effective way to represent data. There was no technical reason why we couldn't say everything is a 0 to 1 in increments of 1/10. We could have done it that way, but the economics were such that zeros and ones were just the best way to do it then. Acting like that's some fundamental property of computers is a mistake, because with quantum bits, we can in fact represent shades of gray, or even multiple shades at once. Why does that matter right now? To a huge extent, your ability to live in a digital world depends on the availability of encryption that you trust. When you've got HTTPS at the beginning of a website instead of just HTTP, when you make a purchase with a credit card online, when you have your home control, your thermostat, your car online, the assumption that data streams can be encrypted, can be tamper evident, if not tamper proof, with technologies like blockchain, that confidence in the integrity and reliability and privacy of the system is all based on one assumption in most systems today, which is that if I take two very, very, very big prime numbers and multiply them, it's very difficult to figure out what those two numbers were after the fact. It's a one-way function. I can produce the product cheaply, but factoring the resulting number back to its two original factors that were multiplied to get it is very, very difficult with current hardware. That's one simple idea. It's not a complicated idea. You can illustrate it easily with any school child who knows what prime numbers are. Quantum computing makes nonsense of that reliance on that simple property of numbers. There are algorithms which, executed on quantum hardware, will already shred most current modern forms of encryption. There are algorithms that are quantum proof. National Institute of Standards and Technology is well into the process of declaring quantum resistant encryption techniques. They're more expensive to use today. You probably won't use them today. But if you're recording data or if you're transmitting data, it is already known that bad actors are capturing encrypted data streams, knowing that in the next 5 years, they will be able to attack those records with, as they say, cryptographically relevant quantum computers, or CRQCs, as the industry calls them. So if you are not today handling your data in a manner that anticipates the imminent possibility of it being attacked by a quantum computing equipped threat actor, federal government has already told its agencies under the previous administration that they should be assuming that by 2035, their data streams will be subject to effective quantum attack. And that changes behavior right now. Today, you need to be asking, what do I need to do to protect data if I care about it being still private 10 years from now? Speed trading on Wall Street, not so much. But important national security or corporate information, maybe that needs protection that's good for 5 to 10 years, in which case the advent of quantum computing is a future that's now.
Got it. So what I think I heard you say there with just 3 minutes to go, there was a lot in there again, but it sounded like you were saying if you have intellectual curiosity about how the systems work, maybe listen to Brian Greene over the World Science Festival, and he'll take you on a journey through quantum mechanics.
Yes.
But for the rest of us, you're talking specifically about PQC, right?
The practical reality is this affects data security. This affects the stability and reliability of our electrical grid and other infrastructure. All of these things assume that they will be protected by robust encryption, which becomes considerably less robust in a quantum relevant world unless there's been anticipatory action taken, which needs to be an urgent priority.
Well, Peter, as usual, my head hurts after spending an hour with you, but it hurts in the best possible way. So I think maybe I'll turn it back to our host, Mike, to close it down. Mike, thanks for bringing us together again. That was a lot of fun.
Thank you, Peter. I appreciate the questions. The questions, I never know what I think until a question is asked. It's a Schrodinger's brain kind of thing. So thank you for the dialogue.
Terrific.
Great questions, great answers, great session. Thanks, everyone. Quickly wrap up. I mentioned our Innovation Summit, March 26th and 27th. So again, if you're in Pittsburgh, in the area, please stop in. We'd love to see you. That is our summit. Just quickly on that, top leaders talking about, where they think, business is headed in the future, very similar to this session that you saw today, you listened to today, breakout sessions, panel discussions, workshops led by many industry experts. And again, sort of a fun and engaging way, we think, for you to network, talk to peers, industry leaders, other like-minded professionals, I'd say. So again, March 26 and 27 in Pittsburgh, and please, we're hyped too. So if you could, follow us on LinkedIn, you'll we host thought leadership sessions on a pretty regular basis, usually every 6 weeks or so. I'd love for you to join those. And enormous thanks to Peter and Peter as we get to top of the hour here for delivering a very thoughtful, very impactful session today. A million thanks to all of you for joining, and thanks for participating in the Q&A. And have a great rest of the day, everyone. And we'll talk to you all soon.